Hello, I'm Ainara, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you about the prototyping process and how important it is for the whole design process. Prototyping aims to construct an idea so we can think about it. This means that we need to create the solution so it can be communicated to others and improve the idea with feedback. The creation of prototypes allows ideas to be made tangible so others can evaluate them quickly and in a cost-effective way, so we don't go on with an idea we fell in love with and we don't know whether it works or not. Why prototyping? To be able to experience concepts. An idea which is not totally developed, that might have errors, is not something bad, but it is the path we must discover before reaching the end. Finding errors along the way does not mean finding a wall that we cannot overcome, rather we have to look for another path that helps us to find the correct solution. Why prototyping still? Because we need early feedback, the sooner the better, from the user or the client. The sooner the better, because if you want a prototype it can be expensive. Imagine bringing an idea to the market that does not work. That is indeed expensive.
Not testing with the user is the quickest way to waste the money we have for the design process. Prototypes also help us to involve different agents who may have participated in the idea, so they give us feedback. They could be the client or the end user. The sooner they are involved, the better ideas they might give us. Prototyping itself is the key to an innovation process because we need to create steps through trial and error repeatedly. Therefore, when do we need to prototype? Well, any time during the design phase. It could be during the editing phase, the conceptualization phase, during the phase to define the idea and the concept. Well, yes, but what can we prototype? We can prototype different levels of concepts, from, let's say, concept dimensions. We have dimension 0, which would be directly just having one idea. We have dimension 1, which would be prototyping a value proposal. Dimension 2 would already be prototyping users and clients. We have dimension 3, which would be prototyping user experiences, what key activities there are, what resources we have, what channels exist. We have dimension 4, which would be the emerging future, and, in your case, we have dimension 5, which would be the extra turn of the screw that'd be the future game dimension. Like in any business models, we have 3 dimensions that an idea or concept must have to be successful in the market. We have one part, that is desirability, or the part one like, I don't like, and it can be a concept we feel attracted to or that works for us, but it must have 2 more legs too, which would be its viability as a business. It has to serve us to make money. The third dimension would be feasibility. If it can be done. It can be a very good idea, we could make money, but then if it cannot be done it does not make much sense. Then, we can prototype each part of those 3 dimensions. We can prototype the aesthetics, on the one hand, the image of that idea, we can prototype the part related to the business model, that of viability, or we can also prototype the part of whether it can be done or not the way we have planned. To do so, we have different types of prototype. We have prototypes which are physical models, we have mental models, we have spaces, interactions, storytelling, everything we need, so in each phase that we prototype, we can see what we need, and from there create a prototype which fits in with what we need at that precise moment. Okay, then, before we see what types of prototype we have, I wanted to tell you that there are some prototyping keys. The general idea is to work fast, to do raw work, that we do not devote too much love to what we are prototyping, because the idea is to make them as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible, to prototype that part that we're trying to analyze to see if it works or not. Then, working quickly, being positive, trying to look for what works and what doesn't in a positive way, and to know which part or key point we are prototyping, because from the beginning we won't prototype everything. In general, we'll look for a key point on which we'll focus, and we'll only deal with that part and then the other. We'll go bit by bit through our concept or business model. With this, a very important part of a prototype is, before creating any prototype, we need to see very clearly what the objective is of the prototype we're making. To know, therefore, what type of prototype we need and to whom we need to show it. Who we need to involve to get the feedback we need. That's why we use some objectives which are a test card or a learning card which tell us what type of test we want to do, what for, with what aim, and what we want to learn from that prototype. Because once we make a prototype, as important as the prototype is, having some conclusions later is too. If we make a prototype and then we don't have any types of clear conclusions based on what we wrote down earlier whether as works or not, it will be useless. We have different types of prototyping tools that we can use based on what phase we are at and based on which part of the idea we're prototyping. Sometimes, it's very interesting, for example, to create prototyping teams where each person has a role. If in this case we don't have a client or a user, we can create that role ourselves and wear a cap so as to think, well, I am now the one who only thinks about the viability of this project and I am the one playing the client. The ideal thing to do would be to prototype it with the end user, with the client, so that feedback is direct, but if that's not handy, we can play different roles. Then, one of the tools would be to create a team with different roles, both if we really have them and if we need to create it ourselves internally within the team. Another prototyping tool that could be useful, above all, at the beginning of an early idea is a value proposition canvas. With the value proposition canvas we can see if we are giving the right answers to what our client or end user needs. If we are giving them the service they wish, where they want it, if we're helping them with payment, if the final product meets their needs, if it's what they wanted or we're adding value, or we are giving more than they need. Another tools that helps us to prototype, above all, in this case, an experience or a service is the experience journey. With the experience journey, what we're presenting is a pre, during and post-experience of the user with those services, our product. In the pre-experience, we're handling the expectation a little, how we expect that service or product to reach the client and what they expect from it. Then, we have to start to generate all that part of how the product will reach them, if they'll know how to use it, and if they have any doubts or not, how we're going to solve those parts. The part during the experience is all that happens while the product is being used and what feedback the user has from it. The post-experience part is what memory our user or client will have about this service they have used or that product that they've been using. Then, this part is also important because the memory of a good service or the memory of a product that gave us a good use is also a way to make the user come back. Another tools that allows us to imagine a use experience or how a service should be is the storyboard. With the storyboard, what we do is imagine, like in a comic, what is going to happen, what actions the user is taking. Like we said with the journey, from before finding the service or product, during and after, and what we'll do here is to draw all those things that are being found in order to, while we're drawing, we can see if something is missing, nothing is missing, they should find someone, a situation, any product, and keep improving that use experience. Another prototyping level we have is mock-ups. Mock-ups can be physical or digital. When we create a physical mock-up, what we're looking for is something quick that can be on paper, cardboard, or even, in this case, it could be a 3D printout. Physical mock-ups help us to see what we are imagining quickly if, for example, we're making a mobile app. We can make, firstly, on paper the screens we think there'll be, the buttons there'll be before starting to draw them in reality to see with that if it is feasible or not, if we think it can be understood, if we need one more screen or not, one more button. First, we quickly draw it on paper before starting to digitalize it or do something much more elaborate. Physical mock-ups can also be made of cardboard. We can start by creating real sizes or not to see proportions, to see if the way a door opens makes sense, in which positions the buttons are on the case we are creating something that we need to be physical within a service or it's more of a product. We can also create scale prototypes. If what we are really designing is something big and we don't want to spend much money, we use scale to prototype. Then imagine it is a chair. We can prototype a chair at a small scale to see if there are certain shapes we like or not, because digital allows everything, the idea allows everything, but once we're creating them is when we see if the ideas truly work or not, or we can even detect mistakes, such as whether something cannot be done. Instead, digital mock-ups can be much more simple mock-ups or quick to do, such as, for example, if we're designing some packaging, we can use a mock-up which already exists on the internet, empty packaging, and add a logo, some colors, some labels, to see if it works or not. We have a lot on the internet that we can use for free, and they help us very quickly to see an idea and be able to talk with the client or end user to see if it works or not. In a physical mock-up, we can also prototype a space. We can also make it at scale and prototype a space at a small scale and see how people move in it, or how they interact in it, or we can even prototype it at true scale so we can move in it or move with our users or end customers to see where they go, how they feel, if they get to where we think they should, if they do what we think they should be doing, or they find problems. Another type of prototyping is the minimum viable product. This type of prototype helps us, above all, if we're suggesting something that is part of a range. Imagine you're thinking about some donuts, right, which is the easiest example for this. And you're thinking that we'll have a frosted donut, but then we'll have a chocolate one, a lemon flavor one, a strawberry one, and another one with sprinkles. Then we have a range. We won't prototype everything from the beginning, we'll create the minimum viable product, which would be the minimum we need to understand that product, to see if it works or not. Then, we create one and we see if it works by being round, if the whole works, and if all that we're testing, if it makes any sense. We'll start creating the remaining products for that service for our range of products, but we'll start with just one, which is the minimum we need to understand the idea, concept, or product that we want to design. The next dimension we have is 3D prototyping, which is on its way. In 3D prototyping we can create a service or a product. For example, in a service we prototype a service at scale to see what interactions happen there and to see if, in that service, those touch points are truly created that we assumed from the beginning, and if they make sense or not, and if we can make the service easier for the user, or there are excess points or instead points we need to include. 3D prototyping can also be physical, like for example, usability prototyping is used to discover if the function is really correct. For example, if I'm designing a handle for a product, I prototype it in 3D to see if it can be held properly, if it works like I think it should work. Here we need to reach a much more complex and detailed level than the one we had been using until now because we've been testing usabilities.
To sum up, I'll give you some tips. Why should we prototype? Because we have to validate all those design assumptions that we had from the beginning about our concept, our idea, our business model. Nothing we have in our head is valid until it has been tested with the end user or consumer. Anything we don't validate with them is a risk that later, when it is happening, when the product exists, when the service exists, the user doesn't want it, doesn't understand it, or is not willing to pay for it. That's why it's better, from the start, to test every step we take, from the beginning of the idea, from the moment we are designing the concept, from the moment something exists and something physical. You need to prototype and validate anything you can. What's important is to understand the type of prototype that we need. That at the beginning of the design process we need to prototype quickly and very roughly, without much detail in the idea of the design or the concept. As we progress through the design process, we'll start to integrate more details of what the final result will look like.